Good. And you?
Good, good. You can see busy promoting mediation and mediators.
No, doing a wonderful job.
You managed to see some or not? Okay, that's okay. I got the message. But what we do is, why not just Chuck, you just tell us about yourself, and of course a lot about yourself, because heart, soul, spirituality has of course a connection with everything that you've gone through. So as much as you want to tell us, because that is important to know where you're coming from. So thank you, Chuck, for coming in. And please, it is your show. I come in only when you want me to come in.
Well, it's our show because it's the conversation, it's the communication, it's the human connection that really nourishes the spirit and the heart and the mind and all those things that flow from them, we hope.
Yep.
But I have kind of a mixed background. My parents were from a very small town in northern Louisiana. My mother was a very progressive, independent, intelligent, strong woman who decided that at that time in the late 1940s, early 1950s, she did not want to raise her children in that environment for reasons we can understand. And so we wound up living and growing up in Madison, Wisconsin, a university town, which had a much greater diversity of people, although being in the Midwest, not nearly the diversity that my present home, Hawaii, which has been my home for more than 50 years, has. So if anything, we've maybe continued her direction, moving toward a more diverse human environment and a more diverse family. My first wife and still best friend is from Vietnam. Our kids are Vietnamese American, our grandkids are Vietnamese American. And so it's a good mixed family in that sense. And most of the families in Hawaii are mixed. And the mixture is not a melting pot because the cultures retain their identities, like lettuce and cucumbers and tomatoes and daikon and all those things. But each has its own identity. Each has its own value, its own place, its own flavor, its own texture. And each is appreciated for that. So yeah, I think that's been a continuation of the opportunity that her model, my mother's model, made possible for us. And it's something I'll always be thankful for. Together with the opportunity to live for 5 years in Vietnam and to continue to return there almost every year for the last 30 years. So it's a second homeland. And it should be, because it's the other home of our children and our grandchildren. So that's a little bit of background.
We don't want little, Chuck, we want lots. Lots. or maybe as we go along, while you take us through all these elements of heart, soul, spirituality, and the connection, mediation, I think maybe all those things will come out there, whatever.
And it's a great introduction, Vikram, because in going from growing up in a fairly small Midwestern town of 100,000, of which probably a third were university-connected people, getting to live in Vietnam from the time I finished college for most of the next 5 years, and then living in Hawaii after that, it's really enriched and broadened the spiritual perspective. It's introduced me to Buddhism, probably the most comfortable religious orientation for me is Zen Buddhism. And Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the most famous Zen Buddhist priests of Vietnam, a peace priest who established peace villages in both France and in the US, in California, and has thousands and thousands and thousands of followers and disciples and devotees all over the world, and who died recently, just within the last couple of months. He's left a legacy that I really commend to everyone. And one of my favorite works of Thich Nhat Hanh, now that we're talking about the spiritual connections of what we do, both professionally and personally, is at the beginning of a book called The Sun, My Heart. And in that segment, a young girl, very young, is in the front room of the temple, and the monk comes in and he pours her a glass of fresh squeezed juice. And it's about sunset, toward the end of the light time of the day. And she looks at the juice in the glass swirling around, and there's pulp and juice, and she kind of makes a face. And the monk says nothing, but he just signals with his hand to her, be patient, wait. And as she watches the juice in the sunset light coming in through the window, the pulp settles to the bottom and the liquid becomes very clear and translucent and illuminating. And she looks at the monk and says, is that like meditation? And I think in what we do, even though the two words are so close together, it's also like mediation, because we not only try to help people purify and illuminate and pacify their thoughts and their feelings and their spirits, but to do that in a way that will enable them to be motivated to collaborate and find a solution that is a mutual solution. It has benefit for both. And it reduces risk and harm for both. And I think in these times, for me, especially living in the United States, where there is so much division and so much aggressive, destructive communication going on, that orientation, that reminder has stuck with me since my mother's example in my childhood, since the example of the people in Vietnam that I've lived with and gotten to know and love, and here in Hawaii. And I think it's something that we can bring into the room. One of the most famous mediation books is actually a collection of narratives by different leading mediators, edited by David Hoffman and Daniel Bowling. And it's called Bringing Peace into the Room. And I think that example from Thich Nhat Hanh's book and from their book reminds us that on a mental, spiritual level, and also a physical level, one of the most important parts of our opportunity and responsibility is to bring peace into the room, to honor it, to nurture it, to cultivate it, and to try to model it in the way that we communicate. And as Ken Cloke and many others, Michael Lang, other mutual good friends have discovered, you do that very well. You bring it out in people with very few words, with a feeling that you bring into the room that welcomes that peace, that welcomes that connection, that welcomes what we try to do in mediation, which is to humanize the connections and the communications. And I think on behalf of all of us, we all want to thank you for bringing that back to the center of who we are and what we do and why we do it. So thank you.
That's really kind words, Chuck. When coming from you, mean a lot. Really, it's really nice. Thank you.
So The other lesson that we learned together, and that I think you also exemplify in your programs, in your communications, in your work, and in who you are, is that the objective of the communication, the whole purpose of both the process and the outcome, are shared learning experiences. And shared learning experiences tend to not only humanize the people who participate, but also to balance and harmonize them and to put them on levels of equivalent human value. And one of the things that we can feel good about in the mediations that go well is that at the end of them, hopefully all of the people involved come away with a feeling that their value has been perceived and respected, understood, appreciated, and honored. And that in doing that, they implicitly recognize the value of the others is as well. So the spiritual dimension of what we do is critically important. And we're all thankful to you for recentering us on that priority.
But and also, Chuck, but you mentioned that in our spirituality, in our professional and personal life, sometimes I don't know, are they two different things or not? As I keep saying that it is a way of life, is it really a profession also? So that also maybe you can touch on.
Yeah, and I think although the activities in our professional and personal lives may be somewhat separate, I think who we are really, hopefully, is the same. One of the leading proponents and advocates of mediation, court-related mediation in the US, Wayne Brazil, who was magistrate judge of the Northern District of California for years, is now with JAMS, and is truly an icon of bringing mediation to the court and litigation environments in the US. Once came and spoke, and one of the first things he said was, if you want to be a really good mediator, you must be a really good person. So I think he's right. I think Thich Nhat Hanh is right, that if we mindfully choose the attitudes and behaviors that model that peace, that harmony, that respect, that understanding, that humanization of others and of our connections with each other, that we offer people the opportunity to do that, and to some extent the motivation to be part of it and to do that. They may not accept. There are people out there who will consistently reject that model, who will regard it as competitive, as something that's designed to take away something that they want, or some sense of entitlement or ownership that they have. Those people are pretty easy to recognize. Unfortunately, too many of those people are motivated by power and status and wealth, and they get it because they're more motivated to get those things, even at the expense of the values of the soul, the spirit, the mind, and the body that are much more lasting. So whether one believes in multiple incarnations or not, the lesson that living this life to be the best person we possibly can, as much, as often, and as deeply as we can, for others and for ourselves, has the same effect, whether you have one life or many lives. whether you believe in karma or religious rewards, spiritual rewards, those are the attitudes and behaviors that are rewarded. So again, thank you for giving us all the opportunity to recenter and reflect and to reconnect with those.
Well, I find it really important. I think we never should lose sight of this aspect. And that's why I continue having these conversations. And of course, like last year, I started that mediators, mediation and spirituality only for that reason, because there's a connection there, which maybe because of that whole institutionalized mediation, which is the one that gets highlighted because obviously it's happening on an institutional level. So maybe that's where these things get lost, but there is much, much, much more of mediation happening outside that, much, much more, which then gets lost because these are individuals out there who are doing their work, and because of their mindset, they're not out there putting themselves out as publicizing themselves. They're happy within them. They're content people. I mean, that's why I'm saying this is a connection there. So that's important. Yeah.
No, and that's a really valuable insight for all of us, because if you look at the people that you have these conversations with, you look at the conversations, you look at the values and the traits, the attitudes and behaviors that characterize the people involved, yourself and the others, and the conversations themselves, those are the values that we would most seek in people that we would trust, in people that we would want to befriend, and people that we would want to offer loyalty and belief to. And that helps to remind and motivate us to go back to that model in the way we behave, even if there are other people or situations that make it tempting to go to a different level or a different kind of behavior.
But Chuck, so now what I did was, of course, when I started the symposium, when I sent that whole communication out, I said, look, we're looking at heart, soul, spirituality from the perspective of the mediator, the parties, and the process. What happened over the discussions? The dispute also came up, that heart, soul, spirituality in relation to the dispute also. So please throw light on all four of these and the connection of all this together.
I think that's a great question and a great direction, because it leads us into recognizing that these collaborative communications, these facilitated negotiations to move from conflict to resolution, may have started and been dominated by power-based negotiations, and then gradually they moved to what became called rights-based negotiations, and then characterized by Fisher and Urey and Patton and the others to interest-based negotiations. And I think you and Ken Cloke and John Sturrock and Peter Adler and others have brought us to a deeper level, a more pervasive and sustainable level that we can call value-based negotiations. Because if you look at really strongly held convictions of people in disputes, the resolutions, in order to be balanced and sustainable, must understand and respect the values of the people involved, not only of one side at the expense of the other. And engaging in the communications that enable us through people's stories to let them humanize themselves in their communications, to let them share with us the values that they feel are connected to the things that have led to and kept them in the conflict. Those may be the keys to the doors that may lead to other doors to get them through that conflict. We're not trying to erase the conflict or all the things that got them into it, but we are trying to help them get through that conflict as intact as possible, so that when they come through it and out the other side, the choices that they have, the abilities they have to see and understand and make those choices and implement them will be as unimpaired by the attitudes and the behaviors that drag them down into the conflict as possible. That's a spiritual exercise. That's a healing process. In Hawaii, we call it Ho'oponopono. In other countries, it has many different names. I'm sure in India it has, in Vietnam it has. Those processes are culturally based, and they're based in the values that can help us respect and honor the pathways to those solutions and future choices.
I really love this value-based negotiation. I think this is what I'm going to use now. It's really nice what you just said. I think, and that's really important. I think, yeah, nice terminology, I think.
Well, and I think your focus on the spiritual dimension and lens of mediation, it reflects that movement. And if we look at people such as you and I and Ken Cloke and John Sturrock and Prabha Nakaranayan and others, Lila Olapali.
We have to mention Michael Lang.
And Michael Lang, of course.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at those people and who they are and how they conduct themselves and how they connect with and communicate with people, they all model that kind of peace-bringing spirituality. And I remember one of the mediators I admire the most, Dana Curtis in Sausalito, California. I noticed as a person and in her work, she did what that book that David Hoffman and Daniel Bowling wrote chose as the title. She brought peace into the room. She brought dignity into the room. She brought class into the room. And I think with great mediators and great communicators, when you come into the room and you see and feel the model, the tone and spirit that they bring and they set, it's almost sacrilegious to violate it. It's not only an opportunity to be a spiritually better, more at peace person, but there's an element of not so much obligation as motivation to go there and to rest in that place. Because there's a safety in that place. And one of the key elements that we know in mediation is they have to be safe conversations. Safe not only in their confidentiality, but safe also in the respect and understanding and the sincerity and the trust that are offered and earned and given to make those communications and to make those choices possible. What an honor to get to do that, right? And to do that for a living and to actually be compensated for it, sometimes in money, sometimes just in the value of the experience. If we ask you, if we ask Ken or John or Dana or others, how much of their working time was monetarily compensated, It might well be a minority of that time. And that's a choice about not only what we want to do with our qualities and our abilities, but who we want to be. Wouldn't it be wonderful if mediation, facilitation, collaborative problem solving, collaborative communication, if all of those things that help to bring people together in peace, we're all sufficiently compensated that no one needed to individually pay for it or to be individually paid for it. It's like something that was enough of its own reward that the society would sponsor and support it. It's a little bit utopian.
No, that's exactly what my thoughts were, and I discussed it with some people also, that this is exactly what we need to go towards, that society itself has to value these people with the mediator mindset, because they're actually content people. But of course, I mean, you're part of a society, so of course you have needs also. I'm not saying they can cut off all their needs, but if society actually first identifies them and then values them, and of course, because of them, if in the community and all there is peace and everyone is collaborating, I think by itself that value that society is adding to itself, that itself is major. So I think that's exactly the direction that I wanted to take it, and that's what I'm trying to do also.
Yeah, that's not only exactly right, but the question is, does that have to grow from the small units, the grassroots, the families, the communities up, rather than being imposed from the top down? Because if we look at the leaders at the high levels, in most cases, they don't exemplify that kind of behavior, those kinds of values. And yet people in their everyday lives still manage to make those choices.
Yep.
And to treat people with consideration, right? The golden rule is not he who has the gold rules. We hope not to believe that. But a friend pointed out the other day, he said, Chuck, I think one of the hardest things to do in human communication and in mediation is to make sure that we are watering the roots, not the leaves. Yep. What would that mean to you if you heard that?
I tell you, during this whole symposium, if you hear some discussions that we've had, one with Sarah in Australia, we had this discussion and how, because she works with indigenous communities, as how in those communities the leaders have those qualities. That's what makes them the leaders there. Obviously, we have moved away from their power play, money play, which took place. So we have to, at the grassroots level, bring those people out as leaders. So, which obviously starts with first valuing them and being able to understand that, yes, what value they bring to society in general. So we bring them out. But I'm saying they are not going to shout out and say, here we are. We have to go out there and ask people, then identify these people, and then we have to bring them out. That's the whole idea behind this whole, I call it the dispute resolution revolution. But that's the idea. It has to start, it has to be ground upwards. And once I was saying there, one of these sessions, that once these people come out and they are your leaders, slowly, of course, it'll make a difference in the community. Then you have your state, you have your nation, then you have the global level. Things, I feel, we can change somewhere. Of course, it has to be at a large level, and people have to get out and identify them. That's all we need. I'm not even saying that we have to give them any kind of special, I don't like the word training in any case, any kind of skill development, because they have it all. We just have to bring it out and value these particular traits and values that they bring. That's what we need to do. Nothing else, Chuck. That's the way I look at it. Actually, it's very simple.
No, and that makes sense. And if somehow we can help the children as they're growing up see that model and feel in their hearts and spirits the power and the peace and the love that that model make possible to be shared between people, those are the roots that we need to water, I think.
Exactly.
And it leads to another thought, which is, in many places, the relationships and the communications between people who are different, including people who are different in age, can have tensions and conflicts. And yet, the model that Asia taught to me, living in Vietnam and in Hawaii, is respect, honor, and understanding for the kupuna, for the elders. And if you look at the ancient models of how conflicts were resolved, especially in Asia, but in many indigenous people cultures, it's the family elders, the village elders that are the central people in resolving those conflicts. And they bring people together and they try to establish the connection between the people based in the cultural values and the spiritual values that honor the unit, the family, the community, the village. So I think you're exactly right. It's maybe we need to get back to that model.
Exactly. Those are the leaders you need. These are leaders because they're leading the entire community. They're not looking at pockets. And that's why, look, I'm telling you, Chuck, I have two issues that I have. One is, obviously, you hear me saying this a lot of times, is the colonization. That for me has changed the whole mindset of society, because that is the way that's the only way they could rule. They had to divide society. So that conditioning that has happened, we have to do that. And of course, we have to look at the indigenous communities. So basically, I have a symposium coming up in August, which you have to be part of. It starts on the 9th of August. That part is good. Basically, what I did the symposium, mediation in our culture and traditions. This is focused on indigenous peoples because it is the International Day of Indigenous Peoples is celebrated on 9th August. We'll start the symposium on that day and we'll take it from there.
Ew, what a wonderful topic and central. And one of the things that mediation, facilitation, groups like Mediators Beyond Borders International have tried to contribute to is the growing and increasing truth and reconciliation forces and movements. They get a lot of pushback. It's difficult to gain the support of formal political leadership, but until we are able to combine a more holistic truth with more holistic reconciliation, including reparations for what's been done to indigenous people, I think the healing will continue to be elusive. And I agree with you. I think there's a very, very important role for mediators, facilitators, and conflict resolvers in that work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we've seen it in the US, in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and in all of the colonization, all of which involved efforts to convert people from one culture and its values to another in ways that actually dehumanized and divided people. So you're exactly right. Understanding those historical movements and what has to happen to heal them and nurture the people that they have excluded and marginalized and victimized. That's still an essential responsibility. And
So you
too
have to
largely neglected.
Yeah. So Chuck, in that symposium, you have to bring in people from the indigenous communities in Hawaii. We'll see how they go about it, the experiences they've had, and how they're benefiting from those things. So you have to. That's your responsibility, Chuck. You have to have a good representation from Hawaii on this. That's important.
Yeah, and we have some great ones. We have some that have come from other places and settled in Hawaii and lived here and taken on much of the culture and the attributes of Hawaii and have developed high levels of mastery of these skills. But we also have a number of indigenous Hawaiian practitioners of Ho'opono and mediation and other arts that can help unify people. And you're right, we don't necessarily look for them in court-related mediations or conflict resolution. We look for them in the activities in the community: elder care, housing for the homeless, education for immigrants, healthcare for marginalized communities. The people who are doing the best work, bringing together the communities, are the best examples and the best for us to learn from and about for exactly those examples. So that's a great idea.
Well, Chuck, the important thing will be when people actually listen to them, just their presence and everything, they'll realize what I'm talking about. That aspect that you said, them with these people coming into a room itself changes the energy in the room. That by itself, people should listen to them. That these are the people, like I said, they themselves are not going to come out and listen to me, kind of. They're not going to say that. We have to bring them out. And I've been saying that we'll make clips of people all over the world, in corners, in villages. These people are the ones that we have to listen to, and you'll feel the difference. I mean, that's I'm looking at it that way. You obviously have you actually interacted with people from the indigenous communities. I still haven't, from the indigenous communities, obviously. But I still have this whole concept in my head that there will be something that they will bring in. So you, of course, you will tell me more about that.
I'm sure that's true. And if you look at it, even beyond conflict resolution, to health, to education, to spiritual learning, all of those things, there are indigenous lessons. And my wife has been studying indigenous studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver online for the last couple of years. She'll be graduating next month. And it's been the most rewarding experience of her life, because she's one of the few non-Indigenous people in her classes. And so the learning experiences that she's able to access because of what the Indigenous participants bring and share can't be found anywhere else. And if you think about not only their value, but their omission, we've been missing those and failing to appreciate, honor, and benefit from them. So what you're doing is going in exactly the right direction to help us recenter on the roots, not the leaves.
Perfect. So I have now 2 speakers, you and your wife for sure, plus you're bringing in more from Hawaii. So it's going to be a long and very rewarding, according to me. That symposium will really bring out a lot of interesting things. So I'll take your dates from you for your because it's going to start on the 9th of August, and we'll take dates, not a problem. We'll continue it as much as we have to continue it. This one I had to cut short because in May I want to have a conference and bring everyone together so that we have a space where everyone can get together, have brainstorm in relation to my Mediation Vision 2026. So that I had to do in May, and I am celebrating 18th May as the World Mediators Day. That's Ken Cloke's birthday. So that's going to be celebrated as that. So it's going to start from that day, that conference.
That's a great choice. And Ken is a great role model for all of us. I mean, he's certainly someone who has learned and mastered the art of bringing peace into the room and sharing it with others in his writings, in his teachings, in his work, and in who he is and what he shares. And one of the things that's most striking about Ken is that he's one of the most approachable people you will ever meet. Rarely have I ever seen Ken turn down an opportunity to share his learning with others and to invite them to share theirs in that process. In your series and in so many more, it's just, there's unlimited value there.
Well, there had to be some person that we had to put out there as, like you said, the role model. So that was important because people can't put a face to a mediator, is what I've heard from people. So I said, let's put a face to a mediator. That's what it's about.
And one of the things that is most encouraging is we are seeing, just as you and I are seeing, role models coming up in conflict resolution who are exponentially multiplying the diversity of the models that we have. And not only in ethnicity or in age or in background or in education or in culture, but in their learning. They're not all law-based. We're now moving into completely other areas of training and expertise and mastery that are bringing those elements of human ability into the conflict resolution field. That's been needed for a long time. Indigenous people have done that forever. In my experience, the Buddhist religion has done that because it's been open. It doesn't matter what your religious orientation is, you're always welcome. The Quakers in the US have been like that as well, and to some extent the Mennonites. And there are others. So opening and connecting people who have not previously been connected is something that you've been doing exceptionally well, and helping us to understand how critically important that is if we're to get by the divisions that some people would like to use for their own benefit and advantage. We can't afford that anymore. There's a human climate change that we need to address, not just an environmental climate change.
And the interesting thing is so easy because we are all connected at such a basic level that, I mean, if you just have to get there, that's all. And that's what I find because I interact with people from all over the world. I mean, it's just, there is nothing. I mean, there's no concept of you are from that place or you're like that or you talk like this or it does nothing at all. We just connect at such a basic level that we start from scratch. I mean, they enter the meeting, I haven't met them, and we just start from there because there are no layers or anything. And that's what I like about, like I keep saying, this mediator mindset. There are no layers or anything. There are no complexities. It's down to something so basic. And that's where heart, soul, spirituality comes in.
And we're in an age where the convenience and the affordability of the technology be it Zoom or any of the others, makes it possible for us to connect with people personally, intimately, and openly and transparently in ways that we never really took the opportunity to do before at this level. So I hope that will continue, not only in dispute resolution, but just in helping to build a global communication community that will be more based on respect and understanding and leave less room and less motivation for the divisions and the harm that they can cause.
So
But you're right,
communication
we
without,
just need to get there.
yeah, communication without borders. That's what it is. And actually, the interesting thing is that what we are dealing with is actually now the in-person. Because what do we have? This screen, and I see this much of you, and you see this much of me. That's all. So it's the person that a person brings. It is not, everything around it. It's not what the person wears, what the person looks like. Is otherwise their height or their weight or anything. All that has now been discounted. Now it's down to the person. And I think that's why this person-to-person communication and that connection is happening.
And maybe that's where we've been given this opportunity to make it possible in a setting that's convenient, it's inexpensive, it's easy, and it's very personal. We can see each other, we can see each other's facial expressions, we can hear each other's tone of voice, we can feel the inflection in our movements and in our voices that convey the spirit behind our words. We can connect almost as well as we could if we were in person, and well enough to make the connection valuable and memorable.
Exactly.
What more could we ask, right?
Yep. And I'm saying that the connection is better only because all the distractions are gone. Like I said, we're now on the person. The focus is on the person, nothing else. Not even the environment that you are in. And like you said, a safe space. You're in a safe space. It's your convenient space. So that by itself also makes a difference. I think that's been the good part. But Chuck, you'll also have to throw light on the topic also, on the aspect of the connectedness that the heart, soul, spirituality bring in between the parties, parties and the mediator, the process, that also, a little bit.
Well, and if we want the connection to be as human, as transparent, as trustworthy, as sustainable as possible, the foundation that makes those four elements possible is the spiritual foundation. It's not the intellectual foundation. An intellectual position or perspective can change as information comes in. And it may or may not be reliable or the same in a day or a week or a year. But the spiritual connection, where the values that we most believe in are, is something that enables sustainable trust and belief in ourselves and each other, that makes the communications sustainable, also makes the resolutions sustainable, because they are based on that spiritual belief, on that trust, on those values.
Yep.
So you're right. That's the orientation that has to be there in order for us to really trust and believe in the outcomes of the communications.
That's very interesting. That, I mean, the comparison between the difference between the intellectual connection and the spiritual connection, I think this is really a nice thing that you brought out. Yep. Exactly.
Well, and that's what we're here to do. Is, I think somebody asked me one time, so okay, Chuck, philosophically, what are we here for? I said, well, maybe we're here to connect the best ways we can with the best people we can and see what might come of that.
Yep.
For me, that's enough. Just to be able to try and engage in that kind of shared learning. And to do that based on mutual respect and understanding. If it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, we made the offer, and maybe making that offer will make it a little easier for the other person, even if they rejected the offer, to consider it the next time it's offered to them. We're planting seeds, we're laying groundwork, and we're offering models.
That's important, but also, I mean, of course, look, like I said, it starts with the dispute itself, that connection is somewhere lost in these elements. So the dispute itself. So that also, I mean, so because of your experience, something more about that we want to bring in, because you obviously, that connection being lost, you've seen a lot of that happening. So you want to bring something there from the disputes perspective.
And sometimes humor can be a really useful tool in conflict dispute resolution. And one of the things that a friend suggested, he said, you know, Chuck, I have a lot of respect for the Urey and Fisher book, Getting to Yes, and I appreciate the tool of separating the people from the problem. He said, but in the end, the problem doesn't get to make the choice or the decision about the solution. The people have to make it. So you're going to have to reconnect them at some point in some way. And I think the values have to be involved. And the values that we can trust live in the spirit. And if they don't, they may not be trustworthy. They may not be reliable.
And I think also, because you spoke about the children, that obviously we have to start there. I feel that all that is there, that spirit, that spirituality. We might look at I mean, spirituality, of course, one is that connection, the religion that is made. But I have, of course, with my discussions with people, they're not connecting it there. So there is something more. So I feel that those children themselves have that. Of course, look, that evolution will take place. I mean, still, the evolution is going to happen. But I think that is what we have to be able to, I think from our side, say, yes, it is there with those children. I mean, it's not that we should put them down saying we'll create something in you. I'm saying bring that part, those children out who have that. And of course, they have that, like the larger mediator mindset and everything. But I think we should always look at it and respect. Age doesn't matter. That's what I feel in these issues. There is that part of the person to be valued. I don't know how you look at it.
No, and that's a really, really important insight, because in children, we can look and see, in some groups, you can see there are some children who have an extraordinary gift for bringing that piece into the room, for bringing harmony to a group where there is tension and conflict and division, for diffusing situations that are moving toward conflict, for reducing distinctions that are not based on human value, maybe based on strength or wealth or status or something like that. If we can maybe try and help all children see the value in that, to get that experience, to have that opportunity, then maybe kids can grow up with somewhat different perspectives, and we'll have less conflict, more collaboration.
And Chuck, I'm telling you, it all starts with something very basic, is valuing those values. Because Rosalia, she's in Canada, she was in her session, she spoke about her nephew. She said right from the time that he was very young, then he was special, bringing people together, whatever he was doing, right from, I mean, very young age. He's only 14 right now. I mean, imagine when that would have started. So she said, so these people are there. But I was telling her that if you don't value these values or this person and this spirituality, whatever else that person brings in, that person is going to go into some other direction. Then you'll be pushing them into maybe a management school or law school and all those things. And the fact that that person can add so much value to the world, that's going to get lost because of the other values that we have in terms of materialism and all that society brings in. Then you push them into that direction. And this is where I mean, that's why I'm saying they have to get in early and catch them early and bring them out and value them. And like you were saying, society should find a way to bring them all in some way, compensate them, remunerate them, whatever has to happen. Society should do it so that they are out there doing what they do best, and only few can do it. It's not that everyone can do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so one example we could think of is, let's say that you have a classroom of children, and instead of giving the children all of the problems individually and having them work on them individually and provide their answers individually and be evaluated and graded and assessed individually, give them collaboratively. I know when I get to teach, most of the time I spend teaching is on role plays where the students can play different roles, but work collaboratively with each other, trying to develop a solution that serves mutual benefits in ways that can be acceptable and fair to all of them.
I think, yeah, but I will just add to what you're saying is that in terms of collaboration, and like you said, they should all be told to collaborate and do things. Let them identify those children who will be the ones who will facilitate that process. Right from that age, they choose that person. And I mean, these people will then be identified because they will have the real use there, at least to start with. And I think people would see there the value that they bring in right from them, that point itself. And that, I think, will grow as we go along, because if children can experience that at a young age, it'll have an impact all throughout.
Yeah, and if you do that, then instead of teaching children individually in discrete individual units, you can teach them in groups. And the groups can work together to develop understandings and solutions. And as they progress in age and sophistication of their knowledge, the situations that they address may move from things like simple mathematical equations with single correct answers into situations with many possible solutions, many possible answers. And then they start to learn with and about each other.
Okay. So, but what I'm going to be doing,
so collaborative right now is problem solving. Yeah.
What I'm going to do right now is, just for the moment, I'm just going to thank you, Chuck, for coming in, only because I'm going to end this live stream and start the other. We'll continue our discussion in that live stream. So just because I told you, because I put out these events on social media, I have to start them on time also. So I'm just ending it. You're not going anywhere. We are still here. So thank you very much, Chuck. I mean, of course,
Vikram,
this is just a
namaste, and thank you so much for all you do and all you are.